Hey friends, me again. I'm back with another challenge. This one is called Hacking WordPress. In this challenge, write a program that will guess the username and password of a WordPress site, gaining entry to the administration panel. We are going to be hacking a WordPress site. So what is WordPress? It started off as a blogging framework, but it has proven to be so extensible you can make almost any website starting with WordPress, from like e-commerce to anything. I mean, it's amazing. Plugins everywhere. This is the WordPress site that is going to fall victim to our schemes. It is the Cat's Rule blog that I just threw together. This is not a real website. If you go to catsrule.com, I cannot guarantee what you will find. This is just a Docker container that I'm serving up off of my computer. But we are going to hack this website. Before I get going with this, I have to say, don't try to hack somebody's website unless it belongs to you, if you need practice. But if it's an actual website, there's a small chance that it could work, but there's a far greater chance that the guy who runs it knows what he's doing, guy or girl, and they will immediately know where you live, and they'll be angry that you tried to hack their website. So now that's out of the way, how do you know a website runs on WordPress? Sometimes it proudly proclaims it is powered by WordPress at the bottom if they're using a theme that does that. But an equally incriminating way to know is if you try to go somewhere that requires login, like WP admin, it should redirect you to a login page. Now, I did a little bit of research on how to get into a WordPress site. Excuse me. What I thought was going to happen is, if I just open up the source here, the login page is a regular form that takes some data, a user and a password, and posts it to the wplogin.php file, which is PHP code. I had trouble with this. It was a lot harder than I thought. I mean, you've got cookies involved, so it's ensuring that the post is coming from a website and not from like a random bot. There's redirects involved, and overall I had a hard time like differentiating between a successful attempt and an unsuccessful attempt. So I decided to ditch the idea of attacking the login page directly, and instead I decided to look at something called the XML-RPC WordPress API. An API is an application interface. It's basically if two programs need to talk to each other, like if you write a program that tells your WordPress site what to do, you need an API to kind of act as like a standard gatekeeper. These are API calls. You can do things like get a list of posts. You can manipulate comments. You can see like delete comment. There's options. You can do things with users. So if we are going to be talking to the WordPress site with another program, the API is definitely the way to do it. And one thing caught my attention that made this sound like promising as an exploit is that the XML-RPC WordPress API is enabled by default. Most people, when they roll together a WordPress site like this Cats dude, they aren't going to poke around the settings. They're going to kind of just get it up and running and then say, hey, it's working. I guess it's fine. So unused features are the devil's workshop, and I guess in this case we're the devil. So looking through this API, I wanted to find a function that would like serve as a good user password tester, because we're going to be sending it combinations of usernames and passwords, and we want feedback on that. I found a really good function. It's called get users blogs, and get users blogs takes a username and password, so we send that up to the API, and it returns some stuff that we don't really care about. What we do care about is if the username and password are correct, it returns this. So that right there serves as a definitive, yes, we got a username and password. We can use that in our program to go through all these guesses that we're going to send up. I did a little more research on what that data needs to look like, and I will show that to you here. So this is an XML API. This format here is called XML, and in it we specify the method name we're calling, get users blogs, and also the username and password that we'd like to try. These are the parameters. So in Python, we'll be sending in our username and password and sort of switching these strings out with what we want to test. So if we want to test Dave and the password down there. So I've already got a virtual environment rolled called WP crack. I'm going to enable that now. That kind of sounds like a street drug. Want to try some WP crack? I'm just kidding. Don't do drugs. I'm going to create a WP crack file, and we're going to put the usual suspects in there, like a main function, just a pass for now. And one of these doohickeys down here. Great. Okay, so what I first want to do is I'm going to write a Python function that will take a username and a password as a parameter and then kind of stick it into this data object, because we're going to be sending that up to the API. So I'm going to right away, why don't we define that in like a constant up here, because that's the XML we want. And I did the username and password in brackets here because that's all set up for like string interpolation now. And I'm going to make a function called wrap creds in XML. That's going to take a username, password, and it's going to return XML format username, password. So why don't we use our main function to test that out just to make sure we are ready to go. I'm going to say print wrap creds in XML, username, test user, password equals test pass. So if we did that right, we should see this big XML blob except with our username and password in there. I'm going to run that. Beautiful. Okay, so now it looks like we are ready to start throwing things at the WordPress API. I'm going to first get the URL, and the way that you contact the XML-RPC is with this URL here. That's going to error out on the browser because it's only expecting data from a program, not ourselves. And why don't I put that up in another global here? I'm going to call this target URL. Okay, and so now we're ready to try out a username and password. Now there's a couple different ways to sort of throw data at a web endpoint with Python. One of them is URL lib, but I think URL lib is kind of rough around the edges. It's hard to write. It's great because you can write it with just like standard Python. You don't have to install anything, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. I would much prefer a library called requests. It's nice and simple. It's just a way to interact with a HTTP web point. Like you can see, you can like just, if you want to do a GET request, request.get. It's not much simpler than that. If you want to like throw data at it, like what we're doing, it's just posts and you can print the response text. It's beautiful. So we are going to use that. So I'm going to do that right in main function. I'm going to turn this into our payload. That's the data we're going to be sending to the website that we just tested. And if we want to hit the website now, it's going to be requests.posts. We're going to post to the URL. And you can see this is expecting the URL and also the data, which is the payload we just took out. And why don't we see what it returns with printing response.text. Sounds good. So if we run that, I'm not expecting to guess the username and password correctly on the first try. I mean, that would be a lame video if I did. Hopefully I don't. There we go. So just like I expected. So we sent some XML in that format we saw earlier, and the server returned XML as we would expect. And we have some information. Incorrect username or password. This sounds like a failure, but this is progress for us because now we know what the server will return if we guess a username and password incorrectly. So we now have what we need to write a method like this. Is correct. That's going to take in the response text, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if this string that I copied out here, we can call that constant. I'm going to say that if that is not in the response, that must mean we guessed the correct password. So is correct is going to return constant in text. Constant not in text. I'm sorry, I confused myself there. So we can test out our function. The username and password up here was incorrect. So we can do this. Is correct. Why don't we do this? Correct is equal to is correct. Text equals response.text. And then say if not correct, print nope. So this is just to test our criteria. This should still print nope because it wasn't correct. I'm going to run that again, and beautiful. So now we got what we need to check a username and password combination definitively. Now we're at the point where we're going to we need to get a whole bunch of passwords and then a couple of users, and then for each username we're going to try the passwords because we are all set up for like a big loop. Let's do the users first. I'm just going to put that in a list here because it's not going to be much. Users. I mean, it could be a lot. What we're going to kind of rely on here is webmasters, when they set up a website for a bunch of different people to use, what they should be doing is setting up one user account per user. But what lazy webmasters will sometimes do is they'll just like make one account that they all share, something like maybe the website's name, like maybe the user is just cat's rule, or maybe it's something generic like admin, and that's all we're going to check for now. That's for really low hanging fruit, that will be enough. And so that's the user. So now we need a whole bunch of passwords, and I'm not going to type those out one at a time like that because there's probably going to be a bunch that we need to try. Instead, I have a file called passwords.txt, which is a list of the top 10,000 most common passwords. This isn't illegal. This is really easy to find. I just grabbed this off of GitHub. But we are going to read in passwords from that text file and use that to feed our program. So I'm going to write a function called getPasswords. That's not going to take anything, and it's just going to open the text file. So with open passwords.txt as file. So we're first going to get the file as a string. Text as string, and we can do that with just file.open. But we don't really want it as one big string. We want to be able to check each password in there. So I'm going to go return text as string split new line. What this is doing is it's going to take each string and then cut it up by the new line character, or when it goes to the next line. So for password, that's going to be the first item in the list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's basically just going to create the list just as it's numbered in here. And again, sorry about the swears in this. I can't control what people choose as their password. That's on you perverts. We're just here to guess it. Okay, so if I did everything right, we should be able to read in the passwords as a list. So I'm going to go from wp-crack import get passwords. Why don't I just call it, and then we'll see what it returns. File object has no attribute open. Well, of course it doesn't. I was supposed to do file.read. That's on me. Sorry, everybody. We're going to reload that with correct code. And beautiful. So I got a list, and if I check that, it should be 10,000. Get passwords, or 10,001. I guess we got a freebie in there. Don't know about that. Somebody lied to me. Okay, great. So now we can do passwords is equal to get passwords. So now what we need to do is for each user in this list, we need to try each of these passwords once. Now it sounds like we're going to be writing a lot of Python because that's a big job. But luckily we have standard libraries to help us out. I'm thinking of one in particular called itertools. So we can look up itertools here. Itertools has a bunch of awesome functions that help you like interact with lists and there's a lot of mathy functions in here. Iter is short for iteration. I mean, you got slicing, filtering, grouping. One that sounds like it's going to be really helpful to us, almost tailor-made, is the product, which is going to return the Cartesian product of two lists. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's say I've got a list of users, and it's Fred, Joe, and I've got a list of passwords. We'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7. And I'm going to import itertools. If I call itertools.product on users and passwords and then print the results, it's going to give me every single possible user password combination. There you go. Python to the rescue. What sounded like a big job before, it's going to be like, well, let's see. I'm going to guess one line of Python. So we are ready to stick this thing in a for loop. I'm going to say for user password in itertools product users password, and this is going to be iterating over each pair, unpacking the tuple as we go. That's just Python stuff. And then we're basically going to be doing this. We are going to be wrapping that user and password in the payload we tried before. So username, I think that's called user in this loop. And then password. It's going to grab the response, and then it's going to judge whether or not it was correct. And we need to rewrite this a little bit because we're going to be in a loop. So I'm going to say if not correct, we're going to print the username and password that we tried. So I'm going to say tried user blah pass blah. And then we're going to stick in the username and password that we're on. But if it is correct, else, it's going to need to make a big deal out of it. So I'm going to say found it in big fancy letters, because that's going to be exciting. Okay, and then we obviously want to print the username and password that worked. So I'm going to say print user, new line, pass, format, user, password. And then, oh, if it's correct, we probably don't want to keep guessing. So at that point, we're going to exit the loop. So just to review, we've got itertools now crunching through user and password combinations. We're only going to try 2 users now. I have a feeling that this guy who runs the cat blog is a real dope, and that's all we need. We've got 10,000 passwords for every user and password. It's going to wrap it in an XML, send it up as the payload, and then get the response. And I think we're ready to go. We're ready to take down the evil cat blog. So I'm going to go back to our desktop, and this is probably going to produce a lot of output. So here we go. Python, WP crack. Off it goes. Look at that. Whoop! And we found it. That did not take as nearly as long as I thought it would. According to our WP crack program, the user is Cat's Rule, and the password is Top Gun. That should have been our second guess. Everybody loves the movie Top Gun. All right, so we're going to give this a shot. I'm going to go to WP admin. The username is Cat's Rule, password Top Gun, and we're in. There it is. The cat blog is ours. And if I were a really bad guy at this point, I would probably change the real password to something else so the owner could not get in. I could probably sell the website to an advertiser, do all kinds of nasty things with it. But for now, I'm just going to do this, because that's where I stand on this controversial issue. And there we go. Website is defaced. Okay, so what have we learned? Number one, pick good passwords. It doesn't have to be an amazing password. It just has to be one that's probably not going to end up in a password.txt file. Download one. I can probably attach a link to this one. Make sure your password that you use for everything isn't in there, because chances are someone like me could get in. Number 2, do your best to disable the XML-RPC API. If you're not doing anything clever with it, WordPress has given you a way to turn it off. This isn't WordPress's fault. I mean, I think to use a password like Top Gun, you need to tick an option that says, I know this password is weak. So it's just, if there's a problem, it's with the people that use WordPress. Anyway, I hope that was interesting to watch. I don't normally do this kind of stuff, so I had fun. And let me know what you think. Thanks.